Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the burning remains of New Portland Colony drift through space. The human settlement had lasted 3 days against his fleet. 3 whole days longer than he expected. These humans were stubborn, he had to give them that much credit. "Sir, the final transport has been destroyed," reported Commander Velton, his tactical officer. "All human military assets in this system have been eliminated." Zethkar nodded with satisfaction. The conquest of the Kepler sector was proceeding exactly as planned. 3 human colony worlds had fallen in the past week. Their primitive weapons and outdated ships posed no real threat to the might of the hegemony empire. Soon this entire region of space would belong to his people. The Imperial fleet stretched out before him like a steel constellation. 12 massive dreadnoughts formed the core of his force, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust. Around them, 43 cruisers and destroyers maintained perfect formation. It was the largest fleet the Empire had sent into human territory, and for good reason. High Command wanted to send a message that resistance was futile. "Admiral," called Navigator Kixerall from her station, "I'm detecting something unusual on the long-range sensors." Zethkar turned toward the young officer. Kixerall was new to his crew, barely out of the Imperial Academy, but her sensor readings had been accurate throughout the campaign. "What is it, Navigator?" "A single contact approaching from the outer system, sir. The signature is strange. It reads as human, but the energy patterns don't match anything in our databases." The Admiral walked over to examine the display himself. The contact was indeed moving toward them, but at a speed that seemed impossible for human technology. Their ships were slow, clunky things that relied on chemical rockets and primitive fusion drives. This contact was moving like it had access to advanced displacement technology. "How long until it reaches weapons range?" Zethkar asked. "At current speed, approximately 15 minutes, sir." Zethkar smiled coldly. Perhaps one human ship had managed to escape the initial assault, and was now coming back to mount some futile rescue attempt. It would make for an amusing end to an otherwise routine conquest. Maintain formation. Let them come to us. On the bridge of the HSV Retribution, Captain Jake Morrison studied the massive Imperial fleet through the viewscreen. 55 ships arranged in perfect battle formation, their hulls gleaming with the arrogance of easy victory. Behind them, he could see the debris fields where 3 human colonies had once thrived. Families, children, farmers, teachers, all gone because the Empire wanted their worlds. "Amy, are we getting any signals from the surface?" Morrison asked his communications officer. Lieutenant Amy Carter shook her head, her face grim. "Nothing, Captain. No distress beacons, no survivors. They're all gone." Morrison felt the familiar cold anger settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd carried since the Empire had started their expansion into human space. The same rage that had driven him to volunteer for the experimental program that had transformed his ship into something else entirely. "Sir," reported Chief Engineer Danny Brooks from his station, "all systems are running at optimal efficiency. The quantum drives are stable and the dimensional matrix is holding steady." Morrison nodded. The HSV Retribution looked like any other human warship from the outside, battle-scarred and patched together from spare parts. But inside it housed technology that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about physics. Ancient human artifacts discovered in the deep void, older than recorded history, had been integrated into every system. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It was something alive, something aware. "Danny, how are our weapons?" "Ready and waiting, Captain. The phase cannons are charged and the dimensional torpedoes are loaded." Morrison turned to his medical officer. "Helen, any thoughts on their formation?" Dr. Helen Price looked up from her analysis console. "Standard Imperial attack pattern. They're confident, probably expecting us to run or surrender. Their ships are powerful, but they move like they're carrying too much weight. Heavy armor, heavy weapons, but slow to maneuver. Kyle, are your people ready?" Sergeant Kyle Young grinned from his position near the tactical display. "My Marines are locked and loaded, sir. Just give us a target." Morrison took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived. For months, Terran Command had been developing ships like the Retribution, vessels that could stand against impossible odds and win. Ships crewed by volunteers who understood they might not survive what they were about to become. "Amy, open a channel to the Imperial fleet. All frequencies." "Channel open, Captain." Morrison stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "This is Captain Morrison of the human stellar Navy vessel Retribution. You have violated sovereign human territory and committed acts of war against civilian populations. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The response came quickly, transmitted on Imperial military frequencies. Admiral Zethkar's voice dripped with contempt. Human vessel, you are outnumbered 55-1. Your colonies are destroyed, your people are dead. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Morrison looked at his crew. Amy Carter sat straight at her station, ready for whatever came next. Danny Brooks was monitoring their experimental systems with the focus of a master craftsman. Helen Price was already preparing for casualties, her medical bay ready for the wounded. Kyle Young and his Marines were checking their weapons one final time. These were good people, brave people, people who deserved better than to die in a hopeless battle against overwhelming odds. But they were also people who understood that sometimes you had to stand up to bullies no matter how big they were. Admiral, Morrison replied, you seem to be under the impression that numbers matter. Let me show you why you're wrong. He turned to Amy. Close the channel. Navigator Kixrel watched her sensors in confusion. Admiral, the human ship just disappeared. Zethkar frowned. Explain. It was there a second ago, but now I'm reading nothing. No energy signature, no mass displacement, nothing. Cloaking device? No, sir, our sensors can penetrate human stealth technology. This is different. It's like the ship just stopped existing. Commander Velton studied his tactical display. Sir, should we begin a search pattern? Before Zethkar could answer, alarms began blaring across the bridge. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. Contact the Void Render, Zethkar ordered. Find out what's happening. The main screen flickered to life, showing Captain Mordex on the bridge of his cruiser. Behind him, sparks flew from damaged consoles as his crew rushed to contain fires. Admiral, Mordex reported, his voice shaking. We've been hit. Weapons offline, engines failing. I don't understand. There was nothing on sensors, then suddenly we were taking fire from directly above. Zethkar stared at the screen in disbelief. From above? That's impossible. Sir, Kixeral called out, I'm detecting the human vessel again. It's right on top of the Void Render. The view screen switched to external cameras, showing the HSV Retribution hovering motionless above the crippled Imperial cruiser. The human ship looked exactly as it had before, scarred and patched, built from spare parts and determination. But somehow it had appeared from nowhere, and disabled a ship 3 times its size without warning. Morrison's voice came over the communication system, calm and steady. Admiral Zethkar, that was your warning shot. Leave now while you still can. Captain Mordex pulled himself up from the deck of his cruiser, blood running down his face from a cut above his eye. Around him, his crew worked frantically to repair the damage that had appeared from nowhere. One moment they had been approaching the lone human ship, weapons ready. The next moment their entire upper hull had been carved apart by weapons fire that seemed to come from empty space. Damage report, he called out to his engineering officer. Sir, main weapons are completely offline. Engines are running at 30% power. Shield generators are destroyed. Life support is stable, but barely. Mordex wiped the blood from his eyes and stared at the view screen. The human ship floated above them like a metal ghost, its weapon ports glowing with strange energy. How had they done it? How had a single human vessel appeared from nothing and crippled his cruiser in seconds? On the flagship bridge, Admiral Zethkar watched the impossible scene unfold. The Void Render was one of his best ships, commanded by one of his most experienced captains. It should have been able to destroy the human vessel without breaking formation. Instead, it drifted helpless while the mysterious enemy ship hovered over it like a predator. Sir, Commander Velton reported, Captain Mordex is requesting immediate assistance. His ship is dead in space. Zethkar's mandibles clicked together in frustration. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. One human ship should not be able to challenge the might of the Imperial fleet. Yet here it was, proving him wrong in the most humiliating way possible. Deploy escort squadrons 7, 9, and 12. Coordinate attack pattern Delta. I want that ship destroyed. 3 groups of Imperial destroyers broke formation, moving toward the HSV Retribution with weapons charged. Each squadron was more than capable of handling a human warship on its own. Together, they should be able to overwhelm any defense the enemy could mount. On the Retribution, Chief Engineer Danny Brooks watched his displays with growing amazement. The ancient technology they had installed was working better than anyone had dared hope. The quantum displacement drives were allowing them to slip between dimensions, appearing and disappearing at will. The phase cannons could fire through solid matter, striking targets from impossible angles. "Captain," he reported to Morrison, "the dimensional matrix is stable. We can maintain phase state for another 40 minutes before we need to recharge." Morrison nodded, studying the approaching Imperial squadrons. 12 ships total, moving in perfect coordination. Their commanders were good. They were trying to surround him, cut off his escape routes, force him into a straight fight where their superior numbers would matter. Unfortunately for them, the HSV Retribution didn't follow the normal rules of combat anymore. "Amy, any word from command?" Lieutenant Amy Carter checked her communications board. "Negative, Captain. We're still too far out for real-time contact. We're on our own." Dr. Helen Price looked up from her medical station. "Captain, I'm monitoring the crew of that damaged cruiser. Their life signs are stable. Whatever we hit them with, it was designed to disable, not kill." Morrison allowed himself a small smile. The weapon systems had been programmed with very specific parameters. They were designed to fight ships, not murder crews. Every blast was calculated to disable enemy vessels, while leaving their life support systems intact. It was a very human way to fight a war. "Kyle, are your people ready for boarding operations?" Sergeant Kyle Young checked his equipment one more time. "Ready as we'll ever be, sir. The new transport system is still giving us some strange readings, but it seems to work." The transport system was another gift from the ancient technology. Instead of traditional teleporters, it used dimensional folding to move people and equipment instantaneously across space. The Marines could appear anywhere within a certain range, completely bypassing shields and armor. "Contact in 30 seconds, Amy reported. Morrison took his position at the command station. "Danny, take us dimensional. Amy, monitor Imperial communications. I want to know what they're thinking." The HSV Retribution flickered and vanished from normal space, existing now in the spaces between dimensions. To the Imperial sensors, it simply stopped existing. But Morrison and his crew could still see everything around them, watching as the 3 enemy squadrons approached the empty space where they had been. Commander Velton studied his tactical display in confusion. "Sir, the human vessel has disappeared again." "Our sensors show nothing." Admiral Zethkar slammed his fist against his command chair. "Impossible. Ships don't just vanish. Find them." The Imperial squadron spread out, scanning empty space with every sensor at their disposal. Energy sweeps, gravitational detectors, quantum resonance scanners. Nothing showed any trace of the human ship. It was as if the vessel had never existed at all. Then the attacks began. The lead destroyer in Squadron 7 suddenly shuddered as weapon fire tore through its hull. Alarms blared as the ship's main reactor went offline, leaving it drifting powerless. The crew reported being hit from below, but sensors showed nothing in that direction. Squadron 9 tried to maintain formation, but their flagship exploded in a shower of sparks as something punched through its bridge. Not destroyed, disabled. The weapons fire had been precisely calculated to knock out command and control, while leaving the crew alive. Squadron 12 attempted to retreat, but found their path blocked by weapon fire that seemed to come from every direction at once. One by one, their ships were crippled by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, couldn't fight. Morrison watched from dimensional space as the Imperial ships flailed helplessly around them. The ancient technology made it possible to attack from angles that didn't exist in normal space. They could fire through dimensions, appearing just long enough to discharge their weapons before vanishing again. "Amy, what are the Imperials saying?" Lieutenant Carter monitored the enemy communications with growing satisfaction. "They're panicking, Captain. Squadron commanders are requesting permission to withdraw. Some of them are asking if we're using supernatural weapons." "Supernatural?" Dr. Helen Price mused from her station. "In a way, they're not wrong. This technology is so far advanced that it might as well be magic." The HSV Retribution materialized directly in the center of the Imperial formation, weapons blazing. Phase cannons tore through 3 ships simultaneously, while dimensional torpedoes struck targets that were still trying to figure out where the attack was coming from. Then the ship vanished again, leaving behind more disabled vessels and growing confusion. Sergeant Kyle Young and his Marines prepared for their first boarding action. The transport system locked onto the crippled cruiser Void Render, calculating the exact dimensional coordinates needed to bypass its hull. Transport in 3, 2, 1. The Marines vanished from the Retribution and appeared instantly on the bridge of the Imperial cruiser. Captain Mordex and his crew spun around in shock, reaching for weapons that weren't there. The humans had somehow materialized on a ship that should have been impossible to board. "Nobody move," Kyle announced, his rifle trained on the Imperial captain. "We're here to help." Mordex stared at the human Marines in confusion. "Help? Your reactor's about to overload. Our scans show you've got maybe 10 minutes before it goes critical. We're here to evacuate your crew." The Imperial captain couldn't believe what he was hearing. The humans had disabled his ship, boarded it through impossible means, and now they wanted to save his crew. It made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. But the readings on his damage control board confirmed what the human had said. The reactor was indeed approaching critical mass, and his engineering team had been too busy fighting fires to notice. "Bridge to all hands," Mordex announced over the ship's communication system. "Prepare for emergency evacuation." Kyle nodded approvingly. "Smart choice. My people will help coordinate the evacuation. Transport pods are standing by." As the Imperial crew abandoned their ship, Admiral Zethkar watched from his flagship in complete bewilderment. The human vessel had appeared again, this time launching rescue pods to collect the evacuating enemy crew. They were saving the people they had just defeated, treating them like refugees instead of prisoners. Commander Velton approached the Admiral's chair. "Sir, we've lost contact with 9 ships. All disabled, all crews evacuated by the enemy. They're not destroying our vessels. They're capturing them intact." Zethkar realized with growing horror that he was losing the battle. No, not losing, he had already lost. A single human ship had torn through his formation like it was made of paper, disabling his vessels at will while somehow saving the crews. "All ships, concentrate fire on Sector 77 Mark 9. Maximum power." The remaining Imperial ships turned their weapons toward empty space and fired everything they had. Energy beams and missiles filled the void with destructive force. If the human ship was hiding somewhere in that area, the concentrated firepower of an entire fleet should be enough to destroy it. The HSV Retribution materialized directly behind the Imperial flagship, close enough that Morrison could see individual figures on the enemy bridge through the view screen. "Admiral Zethkar," Morrison's voice came over the communication system, "you're wasting ammunition." The Imperial fleet fired wildly into empty space, their weapons lighting up the void with desperate energy. Admiral Zethkar watched his sensors in growing panic as ship after ship reported the same thing. No hits, no contact. No trace of the human vessel that was systematically destroying his force. The HSV Retribution danced between the Imperial ships like a ghost made of metal and fire. It appeared for seconds at a time, just long enough to cripple another vessel, then vanished before return fire could find it. Morrison and his crew had turned space combat into an art form, striking from impossible angles and disappearing into dimensions that normal physics said didn't exist. "Sir," reported Navigator Kixral, her voice shaking, "the Eternal Wrath is reporting critical damage. Main weapons destroyed, engines offline. And the Iron Fist? Also disabled, Admiral. The human ship appeared inside their shield perimeter somehow. Their captain says it was like fighting a demon." Zethkar gripped his command chair so hard his claws left marks in the metal. "How is this possible? One ship against an entire fleet and they were losing. Not just losing, being humiliated. His vessels were being picked apart by an enemy that could strike from nowhere and vanish like smoke." On the Retribution, Chief Engineer Danny Brooks monitored their systems with amazement. The ancient technology was adapting to each battle, learning from every engagement. The quantum drives were running smoother now, the dimensional matrix was more stable, and the phase cannons were firing with increasing precision. "Captain," he reported to Morrison, "the ship is out-evolving. I'm seeing improvements in efficiency across all systems. It's like the technology is figuring out how to fight better." Morrison nodded grimly. He had felt the change too. The ship responded to his thoughts now, anticipating his commands before he gave them. The connection between human crew and alien technology was growing stronger with each passing moment. Dr. Helen Price looked up from her medical station, her face troubled. "Captain, I'm detecting some unusual readings from the crew. Our neural activity is synchronizing with the ship's quantum field. We're becoming part of the system. Is it dangerous? I don't think so. But we're changing, all of us. The technology isn't just powering our ship. It's enhancing our abilities. Our reaction times are faster, our coordination is perfect, and our intuition about enemy movements is becoming almost supernatural. Morrison felt it too. He could sense the Imperial ships around them, predict their movements before they made them. It was like playing a game where he could see all the pieces on the board while his opponents were blindfolded. Lieutenant Amy Carter intercepted another Imperial communication. "Captain, their fleet coordination is breaking down. Ship commanders are requesting permission to retreat. Some of them are questioning their orders." "What about the Admiral?" "Still fighting, but his subordinates are losing confidence. Several ships have already started withdrawing without authorization." Sergeant Kyle Young and his Marines had become something more than human soldiers. The ship's quantum field allowed them to move through space like they were teleporting, appearing on disabled Imperial vessels to evacuate crews before their reactors exploded. They worked with impossible efficiency, saving hundreds of enemy lives while their comrades continued the battle. "Transport complete," Kyle reported, as another group of Imperial survivors materialized in the Retribution's cargo holds. "The destroyer Red Vengeance is clear. All crew accounted for." Morrison studied the tactical display. Half the Imperial fleet was either destroyed or drifting helpless in space. The survivors were scattered across the system, many of them running for the outer planets. But Admiral Zethkar's flagship and 6 other vessels remained in formation, still trying to mount some kind of defense. "Danny, how are we holding up?" "All systems optimal, Captain. The dimensional drives are actually getting stronger. I think we could keep this up indefinitely." The HSV Retribution appeared in the middle of the Imperial formation, moving between the massive dreadnoughts like it was swimming through water. Phase cannon fire lanced out in all directions, striking multiple targets simultaneously. The Imperial ships tried to track their tormentor, but their sensors couldn't keep up with something that existed partially outside normal reality. Commander Velton watched his tactical display in despair. "Sir, the Doomhammer reports weapons offline. The Death's Head is requesting immediate assistance. The Starkiller's bridge has been destroyed." Admiral Zethkar realized that traditional tactics were useless against an enemy like this. The human ship didn't follow any rules he understood. It could appear anywhere, strike from any angle, and vanish before counterattack was possible. Fighting it was like trying to punch smoke. "All ships," he ordered, "ramming speed. If we can't shoot it, we'll crush it." The remaining Imperial vessels turned toward the last known position of the HSV Retribution, engines straining to build up velocity. If they could catch the human ship when it materialized, if they could hit it with the combined mass of 6 dreadnoughts, maybe they could finally destroy it. Morrison felt the Imperial ships changing course and immediately understood their plan. "They're going to try to ram us," he announced to his crew. Amy Carter looked up from her station in concern. "Can we avoid them?" "We don't need to avoid them," Morrison replied with a cold smile. "Danny, prepare for dimensional phase transition. Full spectrum displacement." The chief engineer's hands flew over his controls. "Aye, Captain." "Charging the dimensional matrix to maximum power. We'll be existing in 7 different dimensions simultaneously." Dr. Helen Price monitored her readings with fascination. "Captain, if we do this, there's no going back. The quantum entanglement will become permanent. We'll be part of the ship forever." Morrison looked around at his crew. Amy Carter nodded without hesitation. Danny Brooks was already implementing the necessary changes. Kyle Young and his Marines were ready for whatever came next. These were people who had volunteered for a mission they knew might transform them beyond recognition. "Do it," Morrison ordered. The HSV Retribution began to glow with otherworldly energy as its quantum drives reached full power. The ship didn't just become invisible, it transcended normal reality entirely, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions. To observers in normal space, it looked like the vessel was becoming translucent, like a ghost ship sailing between worlds. The Imperial dreadnoughts thundered toward their target at maximum velocity, their hulls straining under the acceleration. Admiral Zethkar watched the distance close on his display, finally allowing himself to hope that this desperate gambit might work. The 6 massive ships converged on the HSV Retribution's position at exactly the same moment, their combined mass representing enough destructive force to crack a moon. But instead of the satisfying crunch of metal against metal, they passed harmlessly through empty space. The human ship had become incorporeal, existing in dimensions that the Imperial vessels couldn't touch. The dreadnoughts sailed past each other in confusion, their ramming attack hitting nothing but vacuum. Morrison and his crew watched from their multidimensional perspective as the Imperial ships passed through them like they were made of light. The sensation was strange but not unpleasant, like being underwater while everything else existed in air. Fascinating, Dr. Helen Price murmured, studying her readings. We're still here, still solid to ourselves, but we exist outside normal spacetime. The possibilities are incredible. The HSV Retribution materialized directly in front of Admiral Zethkar's flagship, so close that the two ships almost touched. Morrison's image appeared on the Imperial Bridge's main screen, his face calm but his eyes burning with quiet determination. "Admiral," Morrison said, "your fleet is defeated. Your ships are disabled. Your crews are safe in our cargo holds and your remaining vessels are scattered across the system. This battle is over." Zethkar stared at the human captain in a mixture of rage and disbelief. "What are you? What kind of creatures can do this?" Morrison considered the question for a moment. "We're humans, Admiral. Just humans who refuse to give up when bullies come calling. The difference is we've learned to fight back." The Imperial Admiral looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were terrified, broken, defeated by an enemy they couldn't understand or fight. Half his fleet was gone and the other half was running for their lives. "This isn't over," Zethkar growled. "Yes, it is," Morrison replied quietly, "and you know it." Admiral Zethkar stood alone on his bridge, watching the tactical display that told the story of his defeat. Red icons marked the positions of his disabled ships drifting through space. Yellow markers showed vessels that had retreated without orders. Only 6 ships remained under his direct command, and their crews were barely holding together. "Sir," Commander Velton reported, his voice barely above a whisper, "the cruiser squadron has requesting permission to withdraw. Captain Morketh says his crew is refusing to fight." Zethkar closed his eyes and tried to think. In 30 years of military service, he had never faced anything like this. The human ship had turned his entire understanding of warfare upside down. How do you fight an enemy that can appear anywhere, strike from impossible angles, and disappear before you can respond? The answer was simple: you don't. But admitting defeat to a single human vessel would end his career and disgrace his family name for generations. The Empire expected its admirals to win no matter the odds. Failure was not an option that existed in the Imperial Military Code. On the HSV Retribution, Captain Morrison received an urgent transmission from Terran Command. The message had taken hours to reach them across the vast distances of space, and what it contained made his blood run cold. Lieutenant Amy Carter decoded the transmission with growing alarm. "Captain, it's from Admiral Parker at Fleet Headquarters. 3 more Imperial fleets are converging on this system, over 200 ships total. They'll be here within 6 hours. Morrison studied the tactical data that accompanied the message. The Empire was not taking any chances this time. They were sending enough firepower to sterilize an entire star system, all to destroy one human vessel that had dared to fight back. "Orders, sir?" Amy asked. Morrison read the final part of the message. "We're ordered to withdraw immediately. Command says our mission here is complete, and the data we've gathered is too valuable to risk in another engagement." Dr. Helen Price looked up from her station. "Captain, with respect, I don't think we can leave. The ship, it's not just following our orders anymore. It's becoming something else, something that exists to protect humanity. I don't think it will let us run while those colony survivors need help." Morrison felt it too. The ancient technology that powered their vessel had its own agenda, its own sense of purpose. It had awakened something that had been sleeping for millions of years, something that refused to abandon innocent people to Imperial brutality. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks ran his hands over the control surfaces that no longer seemed entirely mechanical. "Captain, the ship is telling me things. I know that sounds crazy, but I can feel its thoughts. It's angry about what the Empire did to those colonies. It wants justice." Sergeant Kyle Young and his Marines were experiencing the same phenomenon. They moved with perfect coordination now, their thoughts linked not just to each other but to the ship itself. They had become something more than human soldiers. They were the warriors of a vessel that existed beyond normal understanding. "Kyle, how many Imperial prisoners are we carrying now?" Morrison asked. "Over 800, Captain, all safely secured in the cargo bays. The ship has been providing them with food and medical care automatically. It's treating them better than most military hospitals. Morrison made his decision. The orders from command were clear, but sometimes orders had to be ignored when innocent lives were at stake. Amy, send a response to Terran Command. Tell them we're remaining in system to complete rescue operations. Amy Carter hesitated. Sir, that's a direct violation of orders. Yes, it is, but it's the right thing to do. The HSV Retribution began moving through the debris field where the human colonies had once existed. Its sensors, enhanced by technology beyond current understanding, searched for any signs of life among the wreckage. What they found was heartbreaking. Escape pods drifted cold and dark through space, their occupants long dead from lack of power. Emergency shelters on asteroids had been systematically destroyed by Imperial bombardment. Civilian transports had been hunted down and destroyed like animals, but there were survivors. Dr. Helen Price coordinated the rescue operations. As the ship's transporters began collecting the living from among the dead, families huddled in damaged shuttles, children crying for parents who would never answer, elderly colonists who had survived by hiding in deep caves. Over 3,000 survivors so far, Helen reported. Many of them need immediate medical attention. The ship responded to the need automatically. Medical bays that shouldn't have existed appeared throughout the vessel, equipped with healing technology that worked like magic. The wounded were treated by systems that could repair tissue damage at the molecular level, restore lost limbs, and heal trauma that would have been fatal. Morrison walked through the improvised refugee areas and saw miracles happening around him. A little girl who had lost her leg in the bombing was walking again, her limb regrown in a matter of minutes. An old man who had been dying of radiation poisoning was sitting up in bed, his body completely restored. The ancient technology wasn't just powering their weapons and defenses. It was preserving life, protecting the innocent, doing everything it could to undo the damage that the Empire had caused. Captain, Amy called from the bridge, long-range sensors are detecting the incoming Imperial fleets. They'll be here in 4 hours. Morrison returned to the command center and studied the sensor readings. Over 200 ships, including some of the largest dreadnoughts the Empire had ever built. Weapons that could crack planets, shields that could withstand nuclear fire, crews trained from birth to conquer and destroy. Danny, can we handle those odds? The chief engineer was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on controls that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Captain, the ship is changing again, evolving. It's preparing for something big. The HSV Retribution began to glow with the same otherworldly energy they had seen before, but stronger now, more focused. The hull itself seemed to become more solid and more translucent at the same time, like it was existing in multiple states simultaneously. Dr. Helen Price monitored the crew's vital signs with growing amazement. Everyone's neural activity is synchronizing perfectly. We're not just connected to the ship anymore, we're becoming part of it. Our consciousness is merging with the technology. Morrison felt the change happening to him as well. His awareness expanded beyond the boundaries of his own body, reaching out to encompass the entire vessel and everyone aboard it. He could feel the fear of the refugees, the determination of his crew, and the ancient anger of the technology that powered their ship. The first Imperial fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, their arrival marked by massive energy discharges that lit up space like artificial stars. Admiral Keithvar commanded this force, a veteran of a dozen conquered worlds who had been sent to restore Imperial honor. Locate the human vessel, he ordered as his ships formed battle formation. I want it destroyed within the hour. The second fleet arrived 30 minutes later, followed quickly by the third. The combined Imperial force represented the largest military deployment in the sector's history. Nearly 300 ships arranged in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready for war. Admiral Zethkar, still commanding his flagship despite his earlier defeat, watched the massive fleet deployment with a mixture of relief and shame. Finally, the Empire was taking this threat seriously. Finally, they would have enough firepower to destroy the impossible human vessel. All ships, Admiral Keithvar announced on the fleet-wide communication channel, target the human vessel and fire on my command. No mercy, no prisoners. I want nothing left but debris. The HSV Retribution materialized at the center of the Imperial formation, surrounded by hundreds of enemy ships. But something was different now. The vessel seemed larger somehow, more solid, crackling with energy that made space itself bend around it. Morrison's voice carried across every Imperial communication channel, enhanced by technology that could broadcast across dimensions. Attention Imperial fleets. You have entered human space during a humanitarian rescue operation. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. The three Imperial admirals looked at each other's images on their command screens and began to laugh. One ship, no matter how advanced, could not stand against the combined might of three fleets. The human captain had finally made a fatal mistake. All ships, Admiral Kethvar ordered, fire everything. 300 Imperial warships opened fire simultaneously, filling space with enough destructive energy to vaporize a moon. The concentrated firepower of the largest fleet in Imperial history focused on a single target. When the weapons fire cleared, the HSV Retribution was still there, completely undamaged and glowing with power that seemed to come from the stars themselves. The silence that followed the Imperial bombardment was complete and absolute. 300 warships hung motionless in space, their weapons exhausted, staring at the impossible sight before them. The HSV Retribution floated serenely in the center of their formation, completely untouched by the devastating firepower that should have reduced it to atoms. Admiral Kethvar gripped his command chair with claws that left deep gouges in the metal. How is that possible? Nothing could survive that level of concentrated fire. His tactical officer studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. Sir, the human vessel isn't just undamaged, it's actually stronger than before. The energy output we're detecting is off the charts. On the bridge of the Retribution, Captain Morrison felt the ancient technology reaching full awakening. The ship was no longer just a vessel powered by alien artifacts. It had become something entirely new, something that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions while remaining anchored to normal reality through the will of its human crew. Dr. Helen Price monitored the transformation with scientific fascination and growing awe. Captain, we're not entirely human anymore. The technology is integrated with our consciousness at the quantum level. We're still ourselves, but we're also something more. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks nodded in agreement, his hands moving over controls that responded to his thoughts rather than his touch. The ship is alive now, Captain. Not artificial intelligence, something older and more complex. It remembers things from before recorded history, from when the universe was young. Lieutenant Amy Carter intercepted panicked communications from across the Imperial fleet. Captain, their fleet coordination is collapsing. Ship commanders are reporting system failures, crew mutinies, and mass desertions. Some vessels are already withdrawing without orders. Morrison felt the fear radiating from the Imperial crews through dimensions that normal humans couldn't perceive. The ancient technology allowed him to sense emotions across vast distances, to understand the thoughts and feelings of everyone within the system. The Empire's soldiers were terrified, facing something that challenged everything they believed about the nature of reality. Sergeant Kyle Young and his Marines no longer needed conventional transportation to move between ships. They could step through folded space directly onto Imperial vessels, appearing like avenging angels to coordinate evacuations and prevent unnecessary deaths. They worked with supernatural efficiency, saving lives while their ship demonstrated powers that seemed divine. The HSV Retribution began to move through the Imperial formation, but not in any way that normal physics could explain. It didn't accelerate or change course. It simply existed in new positions, appearing and disappearing at will. As it moved, Imperial ships found their weapon systems shutting down, their engines failing, their shields collapsing. But no one died. The ancient technology was precise beyond human understanding, disabling vessels without harming their crews. Imperial soldiers found themselves trapped on dead ships that drifted helpless through space, but their life support systems continued to function perfectly. Admiral Zethkar watched from his flagship as the impossible human vessel demonstrated powers that violated every law of physics he knew. Ships larger than cities were being disabled by weapons that seemed to fire through folded dimensions. Crews that should have been vaporized were instead being evacuated by enemy Marines who could teleport through solid matter. Admiral, Commander Velton reported, his voice shaking. The human captain is requesting to speak with you directly. Zethkar straightened his uniform and tried to maintain some dignity in the face of absolute defeat. Put him through. Morrison's image appeared on the main screen, but he looked different now. His eyes held depths that seemed to reflect starlight, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond normal hearing. Admiral Zethkar, Morrison said, your fleets are defeated. Your crews are safe, but your ships are disabled. This is your final opportunity to withdraw with honor. Zethkar looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. They were broken men, facing something beyond their ability to comprehend or fight. Half the Imperial fleet was already retreating, their commanders unwilling to continue a battle against supernatural forces. "What are you?" Zethkar asked quietly. Morrison considered the question for a long moment. "We were human once. Explorers, soldiers, people who believed that every life had value. The technology we found changed us, but it didn't change our core beliefs. We protect the innocent. We defend the weak. We stand against those who would conquer and destroy. And now we're something new. Guardians standing watch at the threshold between dimensions. We'll continue to protect human space, but we'll also protect anyone else who needs it. The universe is large enough for all of us to exist peacefully." Admiral Kethavar's voice crackled over the communication system from his own flagship. "This is impossible. You're just one ship. We have 3 fleets." Morrison turned his attention to the second Imperial commander. "Admiral, you had 3 fleets. Now you have 3 collections of disabled vessels and frightened crews. Your choice is simple. Withdraw now, or drift helpless in space until someone comes to rescue you." The HSV Retribution demonstrated its point by appearing simultaneously next to all 3 Imperial flagships. The massive human vessel existed in multiple locations at once, its quantum nature allowing it to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Dr. Helen Price coordinated with the ship's systems to begin the final phase of their humanitarian mission. Transport beams reached across vast distances, collecting every human survivor from the destroyed colonies. Families were reunited, the wounded were healed, and the dead were given proper burial in space. "Over 10,000 survivors recovered, Captain," Helen reported. "The ship has created living spaces for all of them, complete with recreational areas, schools for the children, and medical facilities that exceed anything in known space." Morrison felt a deep satisfaction as he sensed the hope returning to the refugee families. Children who had lost everything were laughing again. Parents who had thought their loved ones were dead were holding them close. The ancient technology had given them the power not just to fight but to heal. The Imperial withdrawal began slowly, then accelerated as more ships decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Entire squadrons powered down their weapons and began moving toward the system's edge, unwilling to continue a battle they could not win. Admiral Zethkar made the final decision for his own forces. "All ships withdraw to minimum safe distance. We're leaving the system." As the Imperial fleets retreated, the HSV Retribution began its own transformation into something beyond a simple warship. The vessel expanded, creating new sections that existed in folded space. Gardens appeared where families could heal from their trauma. Schools materialized where children could learn and grow. The ship was becoming a mobile city, a haven for those who had nowhere else to go. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks marveled at the changes happening around him. "Captain, the ship is creating facilities we never designed. Libraries, art galleries, laboratories, even recreational areas. It's building a complete civilization." Morrison nodded, understanding finally dawning on him. The ancient technology hadn't just awakened to fight the Empire. It had awakened to preserve and protect life itself. The HSV Retribution was becoming an ark, a sanctuary that could travel between the stars and offer hope to anyone who needed it. Lieutenant Amy Carter received a transmission from Terran Command. But the message was different this time. Instead of orders or demands, it was a simple acknowledgement of what they had become. Captain, message from Admiral Parker. Quote, "We understand that you are no longer under our direct command. Continue your mission as you see fit. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Make us proud." End quote. Morrison looked around at his crew, his family, and felt a profound sense of completion. They had transcended their original mission and become something the galaxy had never seen before. Protectors who existed beyond normal reality. Guardians who would appear whenever innocence faced extinction. The HSV Retribution began to fade from normal space, existing now primarily in the dimensions between worlds. But it would return whenever it was needed, whenever bullies threatened the innocent, whenever someone needed to be reminded that the universe still contained heroes. As the ship disappeared from Imperial sensors, leaving behind only empty space and the memory of an impossible victory, Captain Morrison made one final transmission to the retreating fleets. "Remember this day." His voice echoed across all frequencies, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Remember that some fights cannot be won through force alone. Remember that humanity will never surrender. Never give up. Never stop protecting those who need protection. We are the watchers in the void, the guardians between worlds. Cross us at your peril. The Imperial fleets continued their retreat, carrying with them the story of the ghost ship that had appeared from nowhere and changed everything. Soon the tale would spread throughout the Empire and beyond, becoming legend, becoming myth, becoming hope for anyone who faced impossible odds. In the depths of space, the HSV Retribution continued its eternal mission, crewed by humans who had become more